evening, UFO lovers of the interwebs. I'm Alexa, the resident Ookie Spooky Girly, and today we're doing another deep dive into the spooky spottings of UFOs, or UAPs, depending on the term you prefer. Let me know in the comments if you've ever witnessed anything out of this world, and welcome to the top 5 scary UFO discoveries made by regular people. Number 5. The abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. Yes, I know I said I'd be talking about UFO sightings today, but this event is a combination sighting and abduction that I just couldn't leave off the list. So the Hills were a married couple that lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was employed by the United States Postal Service, while Betty was a social worker, so pretty normal folks. They were very active in their local Unitarian congregation, members of the NAACP, and Barney sat on a local board of the United States Commission on Civil Rights, so you know, they seem like pretty normal folks. The UFO sighting happened at around 10:30 p.m. on September 19th of 1961. The Hills were driving back to their home in Portsmouth from a vacation in Niagara Falls and Montreal. Just south of Lancaster, Betty noticed a bright point of light in the sky that moved from below the moon in the planet Jupiter, upwards towards the west of the moon. Now, while Barney was driving, Betty reasoned that she was observing a falling star, but it was moving up. So because it moved erratically and was growing bigger and brighter, Betty convinced Barney to stop the car for a closer look, as well as to walk their dog, Dulcie. Barney obliged and stopped at a picnic area just south of Twin Mountain. Now by this point, Betty had dug out her binoculars for a closer look, described seeing an odd-shaped aircraft flashing multicolored lights travel across the face of the moon, believing it to be a flying saucer based off of stories she had heard from her sister. Taking his turn with the binoculars, Barney thought it was just a commercial plane at first, but soon changed his mind because without looking as if it had turned, the craft rapidly descended in his direction, causing him to realize something was wrong. The Hills said they continued driving on the isolated road, moving very slowly through Franconia Notch in order to observe the object as it came even closer. At one point, the object passed above a restaurant and signal tower on top of Cannon Mountain and came out near the old man of the mountain. Betty testified that it was at least 1.5 times the length of a granite cliff profile. Which was around 40 feet long, and that it seemed to be rotating. At one point, the object descended rapidly towards their vehicle, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. The huge silent craft hovered about 80 to 100 feet above the Hills' 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air and filled the entire field of view in the windshield. Carrying his pistol in his pocket, Barry stepped away from the vehicle and moved closer to the object, which he later said was roughly the size of a huge pancake, and that statement right there just made me a little hungry. I love pancakes. Still using the binoculars, Barney claimed to have seen 8 to 11 humanoid figures peering out of the craft's windows, seeming to look at him. In his report to investigator Walter Webb of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP for short, Barney described specifically that the beings were somehow not human. In unison, all but one figure moved to what appeared to be a panel on the rear wall of the hallway that encircled the front portion of the craft. The one remaining figure continued to look at Barney and communicated a message telling him to stay where you are and keep looking. Barney had a recollection of observing the humanoid uniforms and black caps. Red lights on what appeared to be bat wing fins began to telescope out of the sides of the craft, and a long structure descended from the bottom of the craft. The silent aircraft approached what Barney estimated was within 50 to 80 feet overhead and around 300 feet away from him. Not arriving home until dawn, the Hills stated that they had some odd sensations and impulses they couldn't explain. Now, extremely confused, the Hills said they tried to reconstruct what exactly happened, because notice I just sort of fragmented there, but their memories were also incomplete and fragmented. Now, the rest of the night, the Hills have no idea. They didn't arrive home until after dawn, and they had some odd sensations and impulses they couldn't explain. And they're very extremely confused, and they tried to reconstruct what happened, but their memories were... After sleeping for a couple of hours, Betty awoke and placed the shoes and clothing that she had worn during the drive into her closet, observing that the dress was torn at the hem, the zipper, and the lining, and later noticed a pinkish powder on the dress. Now, over the years, 5 different laboratories have conducted chemical and forensic analyses, and they got nothing. Now, this wasn't the only damage to items in their possession. Barney said that the leather strap for the binoculars was torn, but couldn't remember how. The toes of his shoes were scraped, their watches were broken, and no matter what, they never worked again. There were shiny concentric circles, similar to the rings one would find on a tree trunk on the car's trunk that had not been there the previous day. Now, Betty and Barney experimented with a compass. Noticed that when they moved it towards the spots, the needles would whirl rapidly, but when they moved it a few inches away from the shiny spots, it would drop down. 10 days after the UFO encounter, Betty began having a series of vivid dreams, which continued for 5 successive nights. She stated that she experienced them with a degree of detail and intensity that she had never had before. After the 5th night, they stopped and never recurred, though they occupied her thoughts during the day. Determined to recover their lost memories, the Hills opted to partake in hypnosis sessions. Barney recalled driving the car away from the UFO, but afterwards he felt compelled to pull it off the road and drive into the woods, eventually spotting 6 men standing on the dirt road. The car stalled and 3 of the men approached the car, telling Barney not to fear them. Okay. He was still anxious. no kidding, and reported that the leader told him to close his eyes. While hypnotized, Barney said, "I felt like the eyes had been pushed into my eyes," a statement he would repeat each session. The best anyone has been able to rebut what happened was claiming stress and sleep deprivation as the cause of what they saw and experienced. I'll admit, I'm usually much more of a skeptic, but this seems pretty dang real to me. Number 4, an Alabama spotting. This tale comes from a lovely lady named Lana and took place in Bose, Alabama back in July of 2014. It was around 10:30 at night. Lana and her friend were sitting on her friend's deck, enjoying a late night beverage of the non-alcoholic kind. And her friend exclaimed, "Look!" And Lana looked up in time to see a rectangular shaped object with lights circling around it, constantly changing colors. The duo found themselves repeating, "What is that?" in reference to, the obvious UFO. It briefly went dark and then reappeared, moving towards the property. Now, this house is situated at an elevation of 1,053 feet above sea level and features a very steep drop-off at the edge of the lawn, which is heavily wooded all the way down the mountain. The UFO was hovering just above the very tall trees, and as it moved closer and closer to the friends, a small semicircular shaped object was seen below the larger object. Lana grabbed her cell phone and began taking photos of what they were seeing. It came close enough to the lawn to reflect light onto the grass before straightening itself out and flying at a speed Lana had never seen anything move at, and completely out of sight behind the trees. The large object began getting very bright, with almost fiery looking lights shooting out of the ring where the multicolored lights were first observed. They watched it for what seemed like a short period of time, but later realized they'd been out there watching for about an hour and a half. Lana has no direct memory of the object leaving or blinking out, just being gone, and began to take photos all around in hopes of finding where it went, being able to take a poor photo of what seemed to be two little creatures that we have. In addition to the UFOs, another glowing light appeared deep down in the woods. It would brighten when Lana talked to it, and then dim and brighten again on request. Her camera never recorded a photo of this object, although she's adamant that she snapped them repeatedly. Which I get, phone cameras are a little bit flighty at times. Lana's friend said once while watching the object she was going to get a flashlight and go out there and look more closely, but refrained from doing so when Lana advised otherwise after getting weird vibes from the unknown, which thank goodness they refrained. Who knows what could have happened. Number 3, an Insectoid Race? This story comes courtesy of a man named Rob Holstein and took place somewhere outside of the USA for once. Zigai, Cyprus. I tried my best. It's another recent account, having happened on April 20th of 2016 at around 8:30 at night. Rob and 2 of his friends had just finished their meal and were out in the garden talking, and after a moment of silence, a friend pointed out an unusually bright star moving across the sky, assuming it may have been like a comet or something. After a brief moment, Rob looked up to realize that it was stationary at around 75 to 100 feet above the tree line, and sat there, staring at whatever this was in complete shock. Every 15 seconds or so, it would lower its altitude until it was only a couple of feet from the treetops, and weirdly, absolutely no noise had been emitted from the UFO, which kind of par for the course. Rob tried getting out of his chair to scurry inside, but felt an overwhelming feeling of paralysis. Ditto for his friend. He turned to her to ask her what was going on, but she looked frozen in fear. After what felt like hours, something appeared from around the trees underneath the triangular craft. It was a humanoid figure, with a head similar to that of an ant and skin like a crocodile. It had extremely small eyes in proportion to its head, and long, thin appendages, walking right up to the fence before sharply turning and sprinting into the darkness of the trees. After a brief moment of complete fear, dread, and anxiousness, the craft moved in a linear path towards the west, before becoming no longer visible, and the feeling of paralysis slowly faded away from the friends. Thank goodness. Number 2, aliens just wanna have fun. Time to travel back in time to August of 1994, in Lac du Flambeau, Wisconsin. Now this story was reported anonymously, so I'll call our editor Edward for funsies. It was a summer night. He was driving around with his buddies for fun when they came up to a stop sign and noticed that there were what they thought to be young folks playing on the swing sets at the grade school, but when they pulled up to the playground, everyone had disappeared. Edward pulled up into the horseshoe drive all the way, and that's when they saw what he described as the outline of a white UFO with 2 white lights at the end of each wingtip, hovering above the tree line. Everyone in the car started to scream and holler, like go, 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 go. And then the third light lit up in a bright orange color, almost like an eye pupil dilating. Edward floored the gas pedal and raced away, and by that point, everyone in the vehicle was in some state of hysterics. The group went to a friend's house, and the friend whose house it was told her dad about it. He grabbed a flashlight and the group was going back. The dad even went to the woods but found nothing before returning home, and the friend group ventured to a local pizza place, told other friends about it, and drew pictures of what they saw to compare, and what do you know? They drew the same thing. Later that night, when the pizza place was closing, Edward ventured outside to start the car, but it was making a horrible noise, similar to if one were turning the ignition when the car was already running. His friend's brother opened the hood and unhooked the battery, and Edward decided to leave the car at the pizza place and walk home in fear. Over the next few days, he had heard that there were other sightings within a few mile radius, all taking place near water, which supports my theory about alien ships needing water to control their crafts. Number 1. Salem isn't just for witches. Captured on the morning of August 3rd of 1952, this creepy photo appears to show 4 unidentified flying objects hovering across the skies of Salem, Massachusetts. We know that the photographer's name was Shell Alpert, and that it was taken at Salem's Coast Guard Air Station, and that the objects were spotted above the Winter Island and Cat Cove areas, but little else is known about this bizarre image. Some have claimed that the lights are simply reflections in the window through which it was taken. Others point to incidents throughout the 1950s in which supposedly similar crafts were seen. It's pretty par for the course that information is missing and unknown in this case, since that's what the government enjoys doing when it comes to credible alien and UFO spottings, in attempts to cover them up, but I know otherwise. And that brings us to the end of our time, and suddenly I don't miss seeing stars in the sky as much as I used to, now that my brain is racing about what ifs. If you enjoyed my ramblings today, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you aren't already, hit the bell for more out of this world goodness from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.